So this winter, more and more and more people are going on strikes to a point where you can feel it. You really, really can. That sooner or later, even though people aren't wanting going to admit it, it certainly does feel like this at this point is a general strike. I mean, we've got the border forces going on strike. We've got nurses going on strike. We've got the trains on strike. We've got the postal workers on strike. We've got some, teachers' unions going on strike. At this point, it's almost easy to ask who isn't on strike, to be honest. But does certainly feel like we're getting there. And I wouldn't be surprised whether we do see a serious attempt by all these different unions to group together and say, right, we're all going to strike on the same day and make a point. Could very well happen. And we've talked about before that currently Rishi Sunak is facing three massive problems and tests to his government. And as we've said before, Rishi Sunak's government is a house of cards built on quicksand on an earthquake fault line. So anything really could take down Sunak's government. You've got all these Tory rebellions going on currently. That is a massive threat. You've got this PPE scandal, which is very, very quickly certainly engulfing a lot of high-level Tory members in the government. Rishi Sunak could very well be a part of that, and potentially that could take his government down as well. And of course, you've got this whole striking going on as well this winter. And it would not be the first time that a UK government has been brought down by strikes. So there is a historical precedent that this has happened before. So I've said it before. I really do think next year we will get a general election. I really do see it. And I've said before, if we are here this time next year and the Tories have somehow managed to limp to this day, I will be shocked. I will be incredibly shocked by how they've got this far. But today we're going to go over into this to have a look at that historical precedent. Could these strikes take down Rishi Sunak's government? It's not beyond the realms of possibility. It's happened before. It could happen again. So before we go diving into this, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and our after link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for supporting the channel. And of course, there is the YouTube thank you button. And of course, the Pony Club down below as well. You can join too. So over we go to Prospect Magazine with their title on this of Can Rishi Sunak Face Down Striking Workers This Winter? We appear to be in a repeat for the winter of discontent. The mass public service strike which brought down Jim Callaghan's government in 1979. But this time, there isn't an immediate general election in the offing. So the endgame is more protracted and unpredictable. In the winter of 78-79, Callaghan lost control of attempts to try and cap pay rises at well below the rate of inflation as public service strikes paralysed the country. Rubbish wasn't collected and the dead went unburied. Hospitals were packed and chaos reigned. Callaghan's even majority Labour government was in their fifth year of parliament, elected in October of 1974 and dependent on the Liberal votes. But by the mid-1978, the Liberals had withdrawn from formal cooperation and the industrial strife moved from bad to worse. And the government effectively lost a referendum on Scottish devolution. The Liberals sided with the Tories in Parliament and forced an election. And Thatcher was elected in May of 1979, and the rest is history. This time, however, there is probably another 18 months to go before an election. So it doesn't look good. It doesn't look as if the RTM General Secretary, Mick Lynch, is going to be bringing the government down, even as ambulance workers and nurses join the fray. At least not in the next few months. More relevant, maybe the way that strikers themselves ended in 79. It wasn't the election of Thatcher which brought this about, but rather Callaghan's decision to set up a pay comparability commission in early March of 79. and that the so-called Clegg Commission, after its chairperson, Professor Hugh Clegg, the Clegg Commission went on to award a series of inflationary busting pay awards, exactly what Callaghan had been seeking to avoid, until it was wound up by Thatcher shortly after the election. It was a classic case of a government losing slow control and then rapidly. The price of industrial peace, and once the government's will and authority had been completely vacated, it was essentially to give the unions exactly what they had been demanding. Could the same and similar thing happen this time? And as we said before, I think it is very, very likely. I think he's just got so many of these strikes, and you combine that with these Tory rebellions. We've heard that apparently the train strikes could have all been avoided, that there was potentially a deal on the table. But from what we have heard, Sunak or someone in the Conservative government came in at the last moment and say, no, you can't do that. And that's why we've got the current strikes that we've got. So we do not know whether these sort of strikes will continue, whether this will be a deal to be done, whether there was a deal to be done, but maybe Sunak saw the chaos and the strike actions, and he did not want his rebels to come in and said, why have you done a deal with the unions? How dare you do a deal with the unions? We're going to do everything we can to stop this deal. That could very well be the case. There could be a lot of rebel pressuring on Sunak, saying, do not give in to these strikers, because if you do, we will not be happy. So that could be certainly very, very much a big case going on here, and why we are seeing a lot of these strikes being really intentionally exacerbated by the government. So back to it. Potential strikes by ambulance workers, nurses, and teachers are by far the most threatening to the government. This isn't only because of their strategic threat being large parts of the NHS, and that the school system is to a virtual, bringing a school system to a virtual halt. The worst thing than anything Lynch can do with the national train set is also because they may very well overwhelm the entire pay review body, which has governed pay and conditions in most public services in England, including all the NHS and state schools for more than 30 years. They don't just operate in the private rail industry, however. National privatization now seems. The pay review machinery, independent of the government, but working with the broad Treasury affordability remit, was in itself a reaction to precisely the pay strife which had prevailed in the previous year of collective bargaining. The implement deal was that the pay increases would not fall behind inflation, and the private sector compatibility in return for the unions giving up their ability to confront employers directly around the negotiating table. The setup for the teachers' pay review body for England by John Major's government in the early 1990s was seen as a victory for the teachers' unions after years of industrial conflict in the 1980s, when the Treasury had opposed such a move precisely because it feared the teachers' pay would be driven upwards. This time is the first time that the pay review bodies themselves have been the focus of a sustained assault on strike action. But then it is also the first time that inflation has taken off in recent decades, and the review bodies have not recommended that pay keeps pace. So the big question, if the government is forced into concessions, is whoever will review the review bodies. And does this leave the credibility of the review bodies hereafter? If another Clegg Commission appears on the scene for Sunak to read Callaghan in slower motion. And that is really the case here, because if Sunak is forced into concessions, you've then got to consider, well, what are these Tory rebels going to do? Is there going to be another? Is there going to be, as the article said, is there going to be another potential commission? Honestly, I can't really say what's going to happen, but as we've said a couple of times before on this channel, history has a fascinating way of repeating itself. It really, really does have a fascinating way of repeating itself. We'll see. We'll really have to see what happens on this front. But I think we are right that these strikes are going to do a lot of damage. And the thing is, you've got to mix all of these together. Maybe sort of the scandal is, separate to itself, but I think you combine this with these massive Tory rebellions going on and all these strikes, those two things do not mix well together. Because if Sunak is seen to concede to the unions, the Tory rebels are absolutely going to kick off. And so the question then becomes, how does Sunak deal with his striking workers while at the same time trying to please his very unruly and ungovernable Conservative Party? And I don't see a way, to be honest, out of there. He hasn't got a lot of wiggle room. He's got no political capital. And we've already seen that the current rebellions, certainly over the housing and the wind farms, have gone down. He hasn't got a lot of room to maneuver on this at all. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and an update link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me a coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.